At Purdue University, actually as early as 2006, scientists have been noting changes in the decay rates of numerous nuclear particles. For those of you who don't know, that we have actually quantified a very steady and consistent and reliable data on what are known as the half-lives of nuclear particle, right down to nanometers, which is a billionth of a meter and a billionth of a second scale. They've even got it down to the femto level, which is a quadrillionth of a second scale, and of course a quadrillionth of a meter scale. So they know that this is consistent formula. You don't normally see changes in these decay rates. And what's amazing now is since 2006, scientists at Purdue University have been studying during different cycles of the sun and the Earth traveling around the sun once per year. They're seeing changes as great as 1/10% in some of these radionuclide particles, which is unheard of. In fact, there's no way to explain this as far as they can see, and it shouldn't be happening because this is one of the only known constants next to the speed of light constants that scientists are aware of. Everything else in the quantum scale and subatomic particles is changing all the time. In fact, particles are constantly changing into other particles all the time. So there is no such thing as a stable particle on the quantum scale, looking at the atom and smaller. But here's where this story gets really interesting, William. When a nuclear particle's decay rate, it speeds up. It means it's radiating more, not less energy. So all of the particles in our bodies and the Earth are, due to this new change of the sun, are radiating a little bit more energy, not less than they were before. And we know that studies done on human DNA, that very, very weak changes in electromagnetic fields can cause profound changes, for example, in fish, where the eggs of the fish in a laboratory were exposed to fields 10 times weaker than Earth's magnetic field, and suddenly their offspring are born with what are known as phenotype changes, which means observable changes that are caused at the DNA level. And they're beautiful. The changes on the fish in this particular experiment, where rainbow stripes suddenly appeared on all the new offspring. So the question is, what's going on in the sun? There's no doubt because children, and I just have a brand new little daughter who's 6 months old right now, and amazing things are happening with her. Because their DNA is in a rapid growth phase, they are going to receive more of this change than we are. You know, I'm almost 50 years old, so I'm not going to get as much of it as she is, because she's in a rapid growth phase. Scientists have clearly measured that consciousness clearly can pass through an amplitude of solid mountains and matter like they aren't even there. I'm excited about this because I want to know if it's intelligent consciousness that is doing this. And as the Purdue scientists are saying, there is a new particle possibly responsible for this being born out of the sun. So if there's a new particle being created, and that's what's responsible for this, these Purdue scientists are saying, it's going to change everything. It means there's the creation is making a new particle, and that new particle will have new properties and cause abilities in humans and all living things that ingest it and eventually are affected by it. People are realizing that they have all the power. What's amazing, if it's consciousness that's changing the decay rate in the subatomic particles, which I say it is, because that's the only force that has been measured to pass right through solid wall. And it's the only force that could explain how whatever is happening on the sun is going all the way through the Earth and not being blocked like radio waves would be, and even the weak nuclear force would be blocked as well. Then whatever this consciousness is, it has to be an enormous, great being that is emanating this field of intelligence. So what's happening is, if the sun, this is kind of brilliant, is raising the decay rate of these nuclear particles, which includes everything in our body, then we're all slightly a little more energetic. We're emitting a little bit more energy than we used to.
I saw the sunrise of 1,000 eyes. I saw the melting colors in the sky. I felt the heartbeat of the inner core. I saw a revolution dancing on the floor. Child, don't close those eyes. I got a nice surprise for you. Sweet child, can't close those eyes. Never say goodbye to you. Sweet child, don't close those eyes. I got a nice surprise for you.
This music is from the Isaiah Project, and it is Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, that I have transcribed from the Hebrew text to musical notes in the melodic line, and then added chords underneath.
Individuality, the trademark of any artist, designer, or architect. Each desires a uniqueness to their creation, a quality that separates it from any other. Man naturally has this individuality, his fingerprint. There are 6.5 billion people on the face of the earth, and no two fingerprints are the same. Everything we touch or make contact with is branded with a small expressed image revealing to all who see it who was there. Around 1200 AD, a man named Leonard Pisano, better known as Fibonacci, discovered a sequence of numbers that created a very interesting pattern. The sequence begins with the numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and continues indefinitely. Each number is obtained by adding the last two digits together. A rectangle with the length and width of any two of the numbers of this sequence forms what is known as the golden rectangle, a perfect rectangle. A golden rectangle can be broken down into squares the size of the next Fibonacci numbers down and below. If we were to take a perfect or golden rectangle, break it down into smaller squares based on Fibonacci's sequence, and divide each with an arc, the patterns begin to take shape. We begin to see Fibonacci's spiral. The spiral in and of itself is insignificant. Its importance is revealed in where we find it. Take, for example, the sunflower. The display of its florets are in perfect spirals of 55, 34, and 21, the sequence of Fibonacci. The fruitlets of the pineapple create the same spiral based on the sequence. The pine cone does the same. As currents move through the ocean and the tide rolls onto the shore, the waves that bring in the tide curve into a spiral that can be mathematically diagrammed onto a plot at the points 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and 55. Buds on trees, sand dollars, starfish, petals on flowers, and especially the nautilus shell are formed with this exact same blueprint. With each segment of growth, the nautilus adds to itself one more value on Fibonacci's scale. This blueprint can be seen around us on a small scale every day, but the greatest example of all is directly above our heads. At an average of 100,000 light years across, even the spiral of the galaxies above us are formed with the exact design that the tiny shell is formed. This sequence or blueprint appears to be the trademark of a designer, a proof of a creator, something left behind indicating the one who was there, a fingerprint. As we scan our universe, from the tiny flower to the awe-inspiring galaxy, we see the fingerprint of God.
Of the tenets that are available to us through these lost texts, if we were to go through at least the 45 books that we're aware of, and hone all that information down into those 4 tenets, and I just shared those with you. The first one says there's only one of us here. We're unity by nature. The second one reminds us that that unity consciousness is moving collectively toward this rare moment in history. The third one reminds us that we have direct access to the creative forces of our world. And the last one suggests that the science of compassion may be the most ancient science that allows us to gracefully transcend the great challenges of our life with grace. Well, 2 of those tenets I'd like to develop further. Well, one of those, it's the one that says there's only one of us here, that our consciousness is holographic in nature. The term hologram means different things to different people. Do we really understand the implications of what it means to live in a holographic consciousness? When I say the word hologram, what do I mean by that? Of the many definitions that we may choose for a hologram, perhaps one of the simplest and the most eloquent may be as follows: that a hologram is simply a pattern that is whole and complete unto itself, and at the same time it's part of an even greater pattern that is whole and complete unto itself, while at the same time is part of an even greater pattern. Now, this pattern can be non-physical energy, or it can be very physical matter. The cells of your body are holographic in nature. One cell has all the information it needs to create another one of you. It is whole and complete unto itself, and it's part of an even greater pattern that you call your body. Okay? Consciousness works this way. We are many expressions individualized of a unity consciousness. And what that means, and this is the beauty of the hologram, any place in the pattern of a hologram where you make one little change, that change is mirrored throughout the rest of the hologram. If you make one tiny change, it's mirrored throughout the rest of the hologram. Perhaps a good example, this is a story that's told from the Spanish journals when the explorers were coming over looking for new routes into this world in the 1500s. One of the routes took them around the coast of South America, and the Spanish galleons that were making this journey, sometimes journeys took many months, up to a year, they set ashore for supplies in a place where the Spanish had never recorded being before, and they were met on the shores by the indigenous people of that area who apparently had never seen white people before, had never seen Western technology before. And fortunately for this particular story, one of the first men to meet them on the shore was the shaman of the tribe. He was the holy man. So here the holy man of the tribe meets the Spanish as they're coming ashore. They left the large ships out on the water and they came ashore in smaller rowboats. And however they communicated, in whatever language they were using, the holy man asked them, "Where did you just come from?" I mean, they've been here for years. They've never seen people like this coming up onto their shore. And however they communicated in return, the Spanish said, "We came on this little boat from that big boat with the wooden planks and the canvas sails out on the horizon of the ocean." And the holy man looked to where the Spanish were pointing, and he couldn't see that ship. The ship was there, and it was of a pattern that was so foreign to his frame of reference, it made no sense to his conscious recognition. He didn't recognize it. And as I hear this story, I often wonder, how many times does that happen in our world, in our lives? How many times do things happen right in front of us, and maybe we disallow it because it doesn't make sense in terms of our frame of reference? Is it possible there's a whole separate world going on here that we haven't recognized because we don't allow for it in our paradigm? Well, because this was a holy man, because he was a shaman, he was fascinated by the possibility that these people came from something that he couldn't see. So another individual may have dismissed it. The shaman worked with it. And eventually, what he said, in a matter of moments, he says, if I look out of the corner of my eyes and I squint just the right way and redefine the shape of my eyeball, I begin to make something out on the horizon. And in just a few moments, he taught himself how to see a pattern of matter that he had never been exposed to before. He taught himself to see that. That happened to him on the shore. Miles away was his village, and the people in his village didn't have the same experience that he had, on the one hand, and within just a couple of days, on the other hand, they too benefited from his experience because they then were able to see what was happening on the shores. How did that happen? They weren't witnessing with him on the one hand. The other hand, they learned through his experience. The term we use today is called collective resonance. And what it means to us is that every time one person chooses a new way to respond to the challenges of life, each time an individual chooses a new option, that person then becomes a living bridge for all the others who choose to follow in that person's path. It's not about imposing will on anyone. What it is about is that person now that chose a new way, that chose a new path, they have created a template of a new possibility very close to the consciousness of all others who choose to follow, and that template now becomes more accessible to the next and the next and the next. The shaman on the shore, he chose to see a new way, and through collective resonance, others benefited from his experience. This is the beauty of the hologram. If we have a pattern, perhaps it looks like a snowflake pattern, and that pattern is whole and complete unto itself and part of an even larger snowflake, which is whole and complete and part of an even larger snowflake. And there is one place in each of these patterns where there is a little pointed tip, and we take the tip off in one place of the snowflake. That tip no longer exists anywhere in the pattern. That's the beauty of the hologram. When a change occurs in one place, it's mirrored throughout the whole. It's mirrored throughout the rest of the system. What that means to us simply is this. Here we are on the threshold of a new millennium, creating a new paradigm, a new way to respond to the great challenges of life. We have lived in the world of polarity where we have hated and feared and judged and killed, and we've always had the tools to rise above that hate and the judgment and the fear and the killing. Each time one individual chooses a new way to respond, chooses something other than hate, chooses something other than retribution. That's a big one in our culture now. If you do something, you've got to get even. You've got to pay for what you've done. It's not right, wrong, good or bad. It simply is a path, and there may be the possibility of a higher path. Each time one individual chooses that possibility, it makes it easier for the next and the next and the next. So we ask ourselves, are we choosing to carry across this bridge into the new millennium hate, judgment, warfare, and killing, or do we choose peace, forgiveness, compassion, and love, honoring all of the polarity that brought us to this moment? The hate, the killing, the judgment, the anger, the warfare has served us. It served us well. It thrust us onto a path so we would know ourselves in that way. And now we're invited to heal that path and to choose something new rather than judging the path, being angry at that path and moving on. That's the beauty of the holographic model of consciousness. That is why there's only one of us here. We're all going through that doorway together. No one is left behind. Everyone benefits from each choice that we make as we birth this new millennium. So through the Essene traditions, what we are shown, what we are told is this, that at least once, one man, Jesus of Nazareth, remembered the true nature of his being, the nature of compassion, and we'll define that compassion genetically in just a few moments. He remembered that compassion, he became that compassion in his life, and in doing so, allowed a biochemical shift in his body, a genetic change, a reordering of genetic coding. You'll see all of this very, very clearly with schematics and drawings in just a few moments. And in that reordering, he allowed himself the opportunity to live a phase transition, to live a change of state. And today, we call that change of state resurrection. Now, resurrection has such a powerful connotation. Whenever we say the word resurrection, for so many people, it conjures up images of religious processes. Resurrection has nothing to do with religion, although religions were built surrounding the concepts of what this alchemy is all about. This is the union, the holy union, the marriage between spirit and the elements of this earth, as you saw in Alex Gray's body. So what we're experiencing is this. Our earth is going through a phase transition, low magnetics, higher frequencies. We live within the fields of those transitions. We live upon the earth. Every cell in our body is attempting to maintain a resonance, to stay tuned, to stay with those magnetics, to stay with those frequencies, allowing us to also transition with the earth into this higher expression, this higher form of energy that is being expressed through the 7.8 and 8.6 and 9 cycle per second energy. Resurrection is a path. This man, Jesus of Nazareth, anchored this wisdom. He lived among us and anchored this wisdom in our conscious matrix. He became the living bridge for us 2,000 years later, so that we would have access to his wisdom as we actually live the transition, as Earth actually carries us through the transition. Now, there's a lot of controversy as to whether or not this man actually ever existed, lived or not. Some of the controversy centers around this relic that is known as the Shroud of Turin. Now, this particular shroud, this is a linen shroud that was wrapped, it's said to have been wrapped around the body of Christ following the crucifixion, and is this shroud that was left in the burial chamber after his body disappeared following his resurrection. A lot of controversy surrounding this. I'll say right now, we will never know for sure who was in this shroud. We don't know certainly who it was. In the past, through the methods of dating, carbon-14 dating and things like that, it has taken so much of a sample in order to establish the dates that the original artifact has been destroyed. It would have taken a square foot of this linen being destroyed to date this according to carbon-14 traditions. Well, in 1978, Los Alamos National Labs in north central New Mexico was able to obtain this shroud for a period of time, and they ran some new analyses on it without destroying the fibers, and here's what they found. What they discovered was this. The controversy has been whether or not this image, what is this image that we're seeing on this 2,000-year-old shroud? Some people say it's painted, some people say it's body oils from the body that was within the shroud. What Los Alamos National Labs is saying, and this team was headed up by a gentleman named Ray Rogers in 1978. They're saying this, that the weaving and the linen type of this shroud are authentic to the date about 2,000 years ago that we would expect to see from that time in history. So it probably is about 2,000 years old. That the image that you're seeing on here appears to be a photographic negative on this linen. And here's why they say that. Because when we photograph the negative of the shroud, we end up with a positive of the image. So it may be that this shroud essentially is a photographic negative over 2,000 years old. When we photograph that now, we have a very good positive image of whoever this man was. Now, what the report says, it says that this image was not painted, it's not body oils, it's not some a charcoal rubbing or anything like that. That the fibers of the linen are actually scorched they were scorched from within the shroud, whatever the shroud was covering, the body. The fibers were scorched from within by a high, rapid, intense heat source of biochemical origin unknown to us at this time. That's actually what the report says. We call that resurrection. A rapid influx of tremendous amounts of life force or chi or prana intentionally distributed to every cell in the body, allowing those cells a higher vibratory expression of themselves. So we'll never know precisely who this man is. The damage on the man's wrists, around his head, and in his side do match the damage that is given to us, that was given to the body of Christ during the crucifixion process. Again, we'll never know for certain precisely who this man was. The reason I have this slide here is because I'm showing you at least once in our history we may have been given the opportunity to see, to witness the demonstration of a change of state, a phase transition that we call resurrection. In the Essene traditions, then what we see is at least once this reference being, a reference being that we know as Jesus of Nazareth, the gift that that reference being left for us then was the gift of the wisdom to allow this phase transition, this change of state, this process that we call resurrection within our bodies. Compassion in the Essene traditions. Compassion is a knowable, livable science. And again, this is the image that to me conjures up the sense of compassion, Cheryl's image of Archangel Michael in prayer over the Middle East in the Gulf War. It is through compassion, the science of compassion, and you and I will work together to arrive at this understanding through this video. Through the science of compassion, that emotions, as they were allowed to express fully in the body, shift genetic patterns, genetic codes within the body, allowing the body the tuning, allowing the body to ride and to transition with the earth. As the earth goes through her changes, our bodies are being asked to go through theirs. The image that you're seeing is a frozen image, a still image of a dynamic system from a science that we call the science of cymatics, the relationship between sound and form. In this pattern, you'll begin to understand now why the magnetics of the earth falling and the frequency increasing, why they're so important to you. A gentleman named Hans Jenny, who's no longer with us, developed this science of cymatics back in the late 1940s. And essentially what he said is this: for every vibration, whether it's an audible sound or an inaudible frequency, for every audible or every pattern of vibration, as it's projected into some media, some form of matter, there will be a predictable, repeatable, consistent pattern. And when the vibration changes, that pattern changes. And when the vibration goes back to what it was, the pattern goes back to what it was. Well, what I'd like to do now is show you a series of cymatic images so that you can see this with your own eyes, so that you can feel this with your body. There's a body resonance that I'd like for you to have before we move forward with this discussion. So what you will see now is a series of cymatic images, and I'll let you watch them, listen to them, and then we'll come back and discuss those. The image you're seeing is a cymatics image. It's the result of a vibration being projected into a media. And what you'll notice is that the higher the frequencies of the vibration that you're seeing, the more complex the patterns. As you watch carefully, you'll see these patterns will become more and more complex, resulting or being the result of increasingly complex and higher frequencies. If you listen carefully, you can just barely hear these sounds. See how much more complex this image is, the result of the higher frequency. This is being narrated by a gentleman named Dr. Peter Guy Manners. And you'll hear Dr. Manners' voice throughout as we see these different cymatics images. These sounds are being projected into a media of lycopodium. It is the spore of the mugwort plant. And it's the lycopodium, the particles of lycopodium that you're seeing in motion throughout. Now this particular image, watch what happens as the frequencies increase. If you were to look at a single particle, it would look like it was in chaos, and when you back off and look at the overall particles, you see there is a very high order.
transition to a mobile flowing phase. And back again to the figure. The sonorous figures represent stationary waves, but now we can also observe moving waves. Here, the sand is flowing in a current.
Now look at the rotational effect that you're seeing here. As the frequencies increase, the system responds through rotation. And you'll see this very well in the next few seconds.
When the wavelengths are short, these currents produce a rotary effect. Areas become defined in which the particles are actually rotating.
Now look at this. If you did not know any better, you may believe that you are looking at an image of interstellar space through a telescope. These look like galaxies. What is it that drives the rotational effect in our galaxies? What is it that drives the rotation of the planets? What is it that drives and impacts the rotation of Earth? Now, what we've seen up until now are single signals, single frequencies projected in the matter. What you're seeing here now are interference patterns of two or more frequencies resulting in a pulse. The pulse of the human heart, the pulse that drives the blood through the veins in your bodies. What is your heart responding to? Where does that pulse come from? These systems look almost alive. Simply the result of vibration. When the vibration stops, the patterns stop. Now, you've seen with your own eyes, you've seen what the relationship is between sound and form. And the reason I wanted you to see that before we go forward with this, I know that you know that vibration affects your world. What you may not have considered is that emotion is a vibration. Feelings are vibrations. When you emote and when you feel, what you are doing is generating a pattern within the liquid crystal structure of your body that you call muscle and tissue. Your emotions and your feelings are holding these patterns in place. Now, what's happening in your lives is that Earth is going through a vibratory shift. The liquid crystal of your body is attempting to accommodate that shift. And to the degree that emotion is allowed within your body, to the degree that you allow your emotions to allow the patterns to unfold within your body, to that degree do you experience a graceful transition. And here's how it happens. This is exactly the way this process works. This is not a metaphor. I'm going to describe to you now something the ancients called the sacred circuit. In our tradition, when I was in school, when you were in school, you were taught that our cells, the cells and the DNA in our body, are regulated by the brain, that the brain regulates the immune system of our body and all of our regulatory functions, the heating and cooling of the body, our metabolism, aging and deterioration. I make a distinction between aging and deterioration. You will all be 4 hours older. This is a 4-hour video. 4 hours older after you've seen this video, and you don't care about that. Did you deteriorate in those 4 hours? That's what you care about. And if you did, why? Do we have to deteriorate? All of our responses to the external environment, we're conditioned that our brain regulates all of those. Now, I won't say that that's not true. What I'll say is that that is incomplete, because the brain responds to a pulse, an electromagnetic signal, and that is how it regulates these cells. Where does that signal come from? Well, researchers asked the same question, and about 2 years ago, 1994, 93, 94, what researchers discovered was that the brain does in fact have a signal, and it responds and directs the signal, receives a signal directly from the human heart. That there is actually a circuit, a resonant tuning between the human heart and the brain and the cells of our body. And it didn't take researchers long to say, well, if that's true, Where does the heart get its signal? And this isn't the heartbeat. We're not talking about the heartbeat. We're talking about the electromagnetic pulse of the heart that you would get in an EKG, for example. Well, it didn't take researchers long to discover that the Earth is, in fact, tuned to something else. The Earth receives its signals from something else directly from the Earth. So what we can say is that there is a circuit that moves from the Earth to the heart, to the brain, to the cells of our body, a tuned resonant circuit. It's not about wires connecting things together. It's a vibratory tuning. And this system that we have is a system that is ongoing. Anytime there's a change anywhere in this system, everything from that point down must change. So look at what's happening right now. We just defined the change that the Earth is going through. Magnetic changes, frequency changes. Everything down in the system must respond and accommodate that change. Your heart must accommodate that change to successfully transition. So what we say is that the Earth entrains the heart, and the heart entrains the brain, and the brain entrains the cells. This is the sacred circuit. So another view of the circuit looks like this, because the circuit goes on from our Earth. Here's the cells of your body. There's your brain, your heart. Your heart is tuned to the Earth. Well, where does the Earth get its signals? From our nearest star, our sun. Remember in the very beginning of our talk, we said that our sun is going through a tremendous transition right now. It's losing magnetics, going to steady state magnetics. Well, if Earth is tuned to our sun, I would expect that Earth would follow suit. And what are researchers telling us about Earth? Earth is indeed losing the magnetics. Our star is tuned to something, whatever that energy source is, at the center of our Milky Way. The very first slide, second slide. We saw that at that center, the great central sun, as the ancients called it, the center of the Milky Way, that signal changed in 1991. We began to pick up a new signal that is cascading down through this resonant circuit. So from this very simple diagram, from this conceptual model, you can see that truly the cells of your body, you are truly part of all that you see, resonantly tuned to your world. And you ask yourself, if we have this resonance, if we are always tuned to our world, then why aren't we always tuned to our world? Why aren't we always tuned to the Earth as the Earth goes through the shifts that Earth is going through? And it's a very good question, and that is it's the crux of where we go from this point forward, because you and I have the luxury, we have the opportunity of emotion in our lives, and different components of emotion either enable or disable or impede the body's ability to maintain its tuning to the Earth. Fear. Fear is a powerful ally in the experience of human expression. Fear is also a very powerful discordant frequency that disallows the tuning of the human body to the Earth. And fear in our culture, fear has many masks. Now here is our tuned resonant circuit again. Here's the cells, the brain, the heart, the Earth. Traditionally, now admittedly this is changing right now within the last few years. Traditionally this is what we've done. Between our heart and our brain, we have cut ourselves off. We've separated mind knowing from heart knowing in our world. And the ancients have told us, the indigenous peoples have said for years, love your earth, love your home. That's the key to harmony in your world. To a 20th century male-oriented, schematically diagrammed Western technological society, that doesn't mean much when you say love your earth. Now, as we're able to establish this resonant relationship, we know what that's saying. And the same thing happens between the heart and the brain. Historically, we have cut ourselves off from our planet and from our brain simply through our life patterns and choices of lifestyle and the way that we've chosen to live. And that is changing now as we remember, as we heal this circuit, we heal the process. Fear is the only pattern that I'm aware of, the interference pattern that prevents whole earth, heart, brain, cell resonance. And in our culture, fear has many masks. Now, I placed this image here, not knowing how it would come out across the video. We'll try this and we'll see. This is an experiment that was done at Bell Labs in New Jersey, and it's kind of interesting. Down below, what you see are 200 blocks. It's a combination of 200 blocks of black, white, and gray that are randomly organized, and that's what that is. Up above, when I ask people what they are seeing in this arrangement, this array of these same 200 blocks, just arranged differently, more often than not, what they'll say is a man, and then they are even specific enough to say Abraham Lincoln in some cases. Well, this isn't Abraham Lincoln at all. And if I take this image, I've done this, taken it to a country where men do not grow facial hair and where they've never heard of Abraham Lincoln, they won't see a man here at all. We see it in this country. And the reason that we see that is the reason that I'm showing it to you here. Because your brain attempts to make sense out of all the information that comes to it. And when it finds something it cannot recognize, it finds the next best pattern, the closest thing that it knows, to assign meaning to that pattern. So this is an example of how we do this with our brain and with our eyes. You and I do precisely the same thing through emotion and feeling. We generalize patterns of feeling. Fear has many, many masks in our society. It's not always Stephen King, pure, unadulterated, shake in your boots fear. If you are able to use any or any combination of these terms to describe some relationship in your life, anger, jealousy, egos, aggressiveness, control, overprotective, smothering, trust issues, depression, emotional unavailability, physical unavailability, prejudiceness, unhappiness, judgment. If you're able to use any or some combination of those words, what you're describing to yourself in the honesty of that description is that you are experiencing fear in that relationship. And it's not bad. I'll be very clear. It is not bad to experience fear. What we are choosing to do is redefine the patterns of fear in our lives so that they may become our friends and our tremendous allies, indicating to us the portions of ourselves, of this liquid crystal matrix, that have not found balance in our world as we're barreling down this road toward what the ancients called the shift of the ages. It is through the gift of fear and the redefinition of that fear that we know ourselves, and that we know ourselves in all ways. Fear, as it expresses many ways in our lives, what I can say to you is this, that for most of you, for most people, 90% of the fears that you will experience in your world are not even your fears. You'll go through 3/4, maybe a full lifetime, coming to terms and recognizing that those patterns are not yours. You may lose entire relationships. You may lose careers in the process of the remembering. The fears are not yours. You were born plugged into predetermined patterns of fear. And I'm going to show you that. I'll show you genetically precisely how it happens in this lifetime, in this last lifetime of maturity before the shift of the ages. What you're being asked to do is to unplug from those old patterns, to break the cycle, to create the paradigm where those fears do not mean the same thing to you any longer. That is your gift of the living bridge to those that you hold most dear in your life. It's done through these codes, the patterns of genetics and DNA within your bodies. Now, when you look at life, this is a standard definition, our standard definition of life. It's interesting. This came up from a chemical textbook. Life is a behavior pattern that chemical systems exhibit when they reach a certain level of complexity. That definition is what was behind our mission to Mars in 1976, as we were looking for biological life. What I really believe we were looking for was consciousness and not life, necessarily. In this narrow definition, we sent this spindly-looking little craft to the surface of Mars, and the rickety thing sort of settled in a cloud of dust on the surface of the planet. It was built by a company that I proudly say I used to work for, Martin Marietta Aerospace. They build very good interplanetary probes. And I always have this image when I think about the Viking mission, looking for life on Mars. If I were sitting there, seeing this cloud of dust and this rickety thing coming down, looked like a big spider, onto the surface, and all the dust settles out, and all of a sudden a little tube pops up, and from that tube, a little arm comes up and directs itself in a certain position, and it's silent, and all of a sudden there's a pop, and this thing that looks like dental floss with a weight on the end of it shoots across the Martian surface, and then they reel it back in, and the sticky stuff on the string is holding the microbes as the string is drawn down through a media. And the idea was that if there was life on Mars, that it would show up as a culture in this media. It would send that information back to Earth, and we would say, ah, there's life on another planet, not knowing that within a few miles of where they were looking for biological life, there were archaeological remnants between 50 and 100,000 years old, reaching 2 miles long and resembling very closely many of the archaeological sites here on Earth. Well, this was our definition of life, and we didn't find any life on Mars biologically, so we say there is no life there. Well, when we define that life, what we say is it takes 6 components: water, fats, lipids, proteins, salts, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids to create the life as we know life on Earth. And it's the nucleic acids that we'll focus on. DNA, everyone knows about DNA now because of the O.J. Simpson trial. If nothing else, everybody knows what DNA is all about. What we can say essentially is that DNA makes RNA, RNA makes proteins, and proteins allow the amino acids in our bodies to be what they are. And that all sounds very technical, and what I'll say is you do not have to know any of that. I'm going to offer this from a very different perspective. Now think about this. The reason I put this slide here is so that you can see each of these amino acids, this one here, this one here, this one here. As the amino acids are different, they have a different form, a different geometry, a different shape. I think you can see that. And this is a close-up of more of those amino acids. Notice how this is alanine, for example. It looks like a lollipop. And here we have aspartic acid. Looks like a Y with an extension on, on the bottom of it. Each of these amino acids has a very specific form. It's a pattern. It's a shape. And what I'll ask you to do is to simply consider these as microantennae. Microantennae, microchakras, because that is from a metaphoric perspective, that's precisely the role that they play. Microantennas, microchakras. What you're seeing here, this is an image, a schematic, of an electromagnetic experience. The blue that you're seeing here, this is the electrical portion. This is thought and emotion. And offset by 90 degrees from this thought, trailing behind, if this were three-dimensional, this would be coming out toward you and going back into the screen. The red are the magnetic fields that we are accustomed to in our world. So historically, whenever we've had a thought or a feeling or an emotion, the lag time between the time that that thought is generated and when it comes to fruition is the result of these dense magnetic fields. Think of the magnetic fields as the glue, as the muck, sticky stuff that prevents these thoughts from manifesting instantly. When you have a fantasy, why doesn't your fantasy come true immediately? And think how confusing your world would be if it did. Well, it's because these magnetic fields prevent that from happening. Well, look what's happening in our world right now. You and I are living a time of decreased magnetics, many fewer magnetics. There's no glue, there's no muck, no sticky stuff left to prevent these thoughts from manifesting quickly. What's actually happening, and this is the beauty of this process, when you go to the sacred sites throughout the world, many sacred sites, what we're seeing, now we're able to bring much of this information all together now and synthesize this into the patterns that are allowing our life to unfold as they're unfolding. What we're seeing is this, that in many of the sacred sites throughout the world, the chambers that were the sacred sites, those chambers built 1,000 years ago, maybe in Chaco Canyon, 5,000 years ago, some cases 11 and 13,000 years ago, those chambers simulated then what you and I are living right now. Go to the board and show you this. Many of those chambers simulated low magnetics then. They simulated high frequency then. Every once in a while, we'll find a sacred site in a chamber that simulates both of them together. Now think about this. Think about what this means. It means thousands of years ago, the ancients knew of this time in history. They knew that you would be living this time in history. They built chambers then to simulate and to model what you are living now in your living room. You don't have to go to a sacred site to find and to have this experience. They immersed themselves into those chambers and they recorded what the experience meant to them. They passed it down to you through what became ancient, sacred, and in some cases religious texts, providing essentially a roadmap of what a human may be expected to do to move gracefully through this time in history. You and I live these temples. We're living the identical process to the initiates of old in our lives today. You and I do not have the luxury of going to a temple to isolate, going to a stone building to isolate these aspects of our lives. Our temples have, in fact, become our temples of relationship. This is the way the wisdom comes to us. Now, I've given you a schematic here as an illustration of the way the processes are coming to us. To the degree that you and I view the events in our lives purely through the logic of the mind, through the left and the right brain, the polarity of the mind, you and I always will live in that polarity. That's what locks us into the polarity. That's what locks us into the separation. And there's nothing wrong with that, so please not hear me say that it is wrong. It is a choice to remain locked into that polarity. And the ancients tell us that logic is very important. The logical mind is a key portion, plays a key role in our experience. And they also say that it goes even farther than that. What they say is that in addition to the logic of the mind, that it is the wisdom of the heart. The wisdom of the heart that tempers the logic of the mind. These concentric circles centering around the heart, the seven-layer liquid crystal oscillator that we call the heart. It's also interesting that in our language we have no word to describe a wisdom that comes from the heart. I have to go to another culture. Part of my heritage is Cherokee. And in the Cherokee traditions, there is a word that describes the single eye of the heart, the eye that sees no right, no wrong, no good, no bad. It simply sees an event for what it is and says, this is what it is, and these are the consequences of this event. The word for that is Shante Ishta, the single eye of the heart. What you and I are asking ourselves to do in this lifetime, through the temples of our emotions, through the temples of our relationships, is to find that balance between the logical mind and the wisdom of the heart and live that balance day in and day out. That becomes the compassion that we choose to have in our lives. This beautiful image I'm showing to you now because in a very real sense, what I'll say to you is that you do not need to go to a temple anywhere on this earth to have these experiences. It's fun to do that. You may do that, and you may have some very powerful experiences. Those temples may be catalysts for memory within your body. That certainly is true, and it's not necessary. Because for me, the greatest temple and the greatest mystery school of all is this temple right here. It's the temple of your soul. It's a temple that has brought you into the room that is allowing you to view, you and I, to view this video as we're seeing it right now. And it is in this temple that you will know of yourselves in all ways, and in that knowing, find the mastery that leads you gracefully into the transition, the phase change that the ancients called the shift of the ages. That is the message, I believe, of this and other reference beings. This man lived that science. He lived the science of compassion. He anchored it among us. I was taught when I was young that the gift of this man was in his death, that he died for my sins that I had not even yet committed in my life. And it made about this much sense to me. So I was asking myself to explore further. And what we now know is that this man's gift was not in his death, first of all, because he never died. If he had died, the message would have been lost. This man resurrected. And resurrection is much different than death. And it was in the resurrection and in the gift of his life, anchoring the message, walking among humans, living the message day in and day out, living compassion, that he became the living bridge. If one person saw the demonstration of his life, then it was anchored in this world and it became a memory. And that memory, that electromagnetic pulse, just like you saw in the cymatics images, that memory is the memory that he is the living bridge left for you and I. And he became that bridge. You, in your lifetime, now you are being asked to become that living bridge for yourself and for those that you hold most dear in the living, day in and day out, of whatever your life means to you through the science of compassion. Becoming a compassionate and forgiving being. And there is a science to that. It's not a random, nebulous concept. There are very real parameters that define for us what compassion is all about. We've covered a tremendous amount of information in a relatively brief period of time. And I'd like to take just a moment to summarize, bring some of these concepts into perspective, into focus, and then spend the next few minutes moving from there with personal experiences, describing, making concrete some of the points that may appear to be a little bit nebulous at this time. So I'd like to step over to our board and go through briefly what we began speaking about earlier in this day. Everyone feels that something's happening in their lives. Now, for the first time, our scientists are able to digitally quantify what that something is. The Earth is, in fact, experiencing a drop in magnetics, an increase in frequency, and they appear to be moving toward a point where they will culminate in what the ancients called the shift of the ages. Through the sacred circuit, you saw the images of the sacred circuit, how every cell in our body is tuned to the brain, which is trained to the heart and tuned to the earth. Our body is attempting to match these changes that the Earth is going through. Our body is trying to maintain a tuning, a resonance to these changes. As Earth vibrates in an increased fashion and experiences lower and lower magnetics. The only way that our bodies are able to maintain this tuning is through the allowing of our emotions. If you and I were rocks, if we were sitting out on the sidewalk as a pile of concrete, we would always be in tune with the earth, and we would not have the opportunity to feel and emote. And it is through the gift of emotion, the gift of feeling, that we are able to create interference patterns that we call fear, impeding our ability to allow this tuning process. So what is happening is you and I are barreling down this road toward the time the ancients called the shift of the ages. Our bodies are attempting to match this tuning within the earth, and the only mechanism that we have that allows that process is our ability to emote and to feel. And you don't have to know any of that. That is the context within which this whole process is unfolding. Now, the way it comes about is that you and I skillfully and masterfully in our lives have learned to create relationships, interpersonal relationships with other people. Not all romantic, although romantic relationships sometimes are the most intense and the fastest learning mechanisms that we have. Any relationship, any interpersonal action that you have with another human is a relationship that I'm referencing now. It could be a 2-minute relationship with a checkout person at a Safeway, or a 30-year relationship with a spouse who you've known and loved dearly. It can be an interpersonal relationship with a coworker, with a supervisor, with a sibling, or simply a friend. And even if you live on a mountaintop all by yourself and you never see another person, you're still having a relationship with yourself. So you are always in relationship with someone. Those relationships are your opportunity to experience emotion. Emotion is what it is that turns off and on the patterns of DNA within your body that allow you to gracefully transition through these experiences, times of tremendous change in very compressed time frames. That is why so many people now are saying, that time, they sense that time is speeding up. Well, you measure time, your cells measure time by the number of pulses per second that our planet emanates. Well, those number of pulses have gone from 7.8 to at least 8.6 cycles per second. So yes, I would expect that you will sense that time speeding up, because it is. As the days grow shorter, Earth pulsates faster. Many people now are saying that they are experiencing very intense emotions through even more intense relationships. And if that's true, I would not be surprised if it is true because of this. As we get closer and closer to this time that the ancients called the shift of the ages, we are asking ourselves with a greater and greater sense of urgency to find balance, to reconcile the patterns of our lives so that they may serve us and not hinder us in the evolutionary path along this road to the shift. Many people are saying now that they are sensing a tremendous sense of anxiety and urgency within their bodies. They are sensing on some level, they are feeling this process as it unfolds within our lives. Well, you know, as I talk to people in many parts of the world, I have the opportunity. And people say to me, I understand what you're saying here. What good does it do if I change and no one else around me changes? What good does it do if I remember compassion in my life, if I become compassion, if I remember no hate in a world that has learned to hate in the past, or if I remember no fear in a world that has learned to fear in the past? Well, to help understand what good that does, I have a short video clip that I'd like to show you. In the science of chaos theory, there is a mathematical equation that defines the point where order and chaos merge. It's a membrane where order and chaos come together. And until recently, it was a nebulous theoretical point. And with the advent of high-speed computers, now we're able to plug the mathematical formula into these computers and create an image, a picture of what this image actually looks like. We call the resulting image the Mandelbrot set. Through the Mandelbrot experience, through the holographic nature of our experience, every time you remember that to hate is an option and that you have a higher option, that to fear is an option and that you may choose a higher option, each time you remember that, to some degree, you become the living bridge in the holographic nature of our awareness, anchoring that option, anchoring that wisdom for all who have the courage to follow you. That's your gift. That's your opportunity. It's through our relationships that we have the opportunity to demonstrate to one another and to ourselves the mastery of the emotions and the mastery of what our lives have come to be. It is through the science of compassion and the temples of our relationships that you and I are being gifted the opportunity to tune our bodies to the changes that the earth is asking us to accommodate within our lives. So we've just spent the last couple of hours going over many of the parameters of what that tuning is all about and what's involved in that tuning. Some of the concepts may sound a little technical, some may sound a little nebulous, and because of that, what I'd like to do now for the next few minutes is to demonstrate to you through a real-life story precisely how these temples may come into your lives, sometimes when you least expect it, and what the temples mean to you as they're unfolding in your life. The ancient Essenes perhaps identified best the role of our personal relationships and categorized them. They went so far as to actually categorize 7 mysteries of relationship that we would live, each individual through the course of their lives would live simply by living life in the presence of one another. They have categorized these as mirrors, and what they remind us of is that in each moment of our life, the reality that we have become within is mirrored to us. It is a reflected reality. It is mirrored to us by the actions and the choices and the language of those around us. The first mirror of those relationships is a mirror of our presence in the moment. It's the mystery of the first mirror, what it is that we reflect to those around us in the moment. When we find ourselves surrounded by individuals and patterns of relationship and behavior with a dominant aspect of anger or rage or fear, perhaps. And the mirror works both ways. It could just as easily be joy and ecstasy and happiness in our lives. If the first mirror is at play, what we're seeing is a mirror of that which we are in the moment, that's which we are radiating to those individuals around us as they mirror or shine back to us that which has been offered, the mirror of that which we are in the moment. The second mirror of relationship is of a similar quality, although it's a little more subtle. Rather than mirroring to us what we are in the moment, the second mirror mirrors to us that which we judge in the moment. If you should find yourself surrounded by individuals who demonstrate patterns of behavior that perhaps frustrate you, push your buttons of anger or rage, and you sense that those are not your patterns, they're not you in the moment, you ask yourself, are they showing me in this moment? And you say honestly to yourself, no, then there's a good possibility they may be showing you that which you judge in the moment, the anger and the rage or the joy that you are judging in that moment. When you find many different people demonstrating the same patterns to you, many different people demonstrating their anger, their rage to you. Have you ever been angry and been in a big hurry to get somewhere and gotten into your car to drive to wherever it was you were going and found that everywhere you went, you made the wrong choices? You made the wrong choice in the teller line at the bank. You chose the slow line. You made the wrong choice on the exit ramp on the freeway. And everywhere when you're driving down the road, you're seeing people that are pulling out in front of you and then doing about 30 miles an hour in a 55. They may be mirroring to you what you are in that moment. We're going to talk about a reflected reality in just a few moments, a reflected reality. Often, the mystery of the first mirror is precisely what's happening. Often we will find people in our presence who are mirroring to us that which we are in the moment, and often that's not the case. And then people say, well, the mirrors don't work. Well, they do work if we have the wisdom to recognize what it is they're saying. A few years ago, I had the opportunity, a rare opportunity, have 3 people come into my life in the same month. Now, that should have been my clue right there. When 3 brand new relationships, very different in nature, all occur within the same month, that's the flag that says something's going to happen here. You better believe it. One of them was potentially a romantic relationship. One of them was potentially a business relationship. And one was a mix between a business, a relationship, and a friendship. Each of them came into my life. Each of them came to me. And that's to have been the second clue. Each of them found me. The romantic relationship, it was with someone who I had worked with. We had spent a lot of time together. We had a lot of common interests, and it was one of those things where it just kind of made sense to be together. It wasn't like there wasn't a powerful magnetic attraction. It was more, it just seemed like the thing to do. The business relationship was especially interesting for me. I was very busy doing seminars, more than full-time. It's like we are now. And there was a gentleman that came to me and offered to do the logistics and to set these seminars up, allowing me, freeing me up to do the things that I was choosing to do more of, and allowing him to do the things that he did best. Sounded like a good plan for me to do that. And the friendship and kind of quasi-business relationship, there was a gentleman, a very talented, very skilled carpenter, who asked if he could house sit on my property in northern New Mexico while I was leading a group to Egypt in the late fall. And I had been looking for someone to stay on the property, and it looked like also a good thing to do. He said that he would like to stay at that property in exchange for his carpentry and caretake. And so all of these happened right about the same time. It was a very, very busy time in my life. And I said, okay, sure. Well, within that month, within the same month that each of those 3 people came into my life, each of them just about began to make me crazy. They were just driving me right up the wall. And there's a pattern that I had demonstrated throughout much of my life. When things were making me crazy, we call it crazy making, when things were doing that for me, I would use logic. And through my logic, I'd say, oh, Greg, you're just tired. You know, you've been on the road a lot. You know, you're under a lot of pressure right now. Let's see how it is in another week or so, or see how it is in a couple of weeks. And I would go away. I did this with these people, and I'd go away on the trip, and then I'd come back in a week or 10 days, and everything was the same, and I did this again and again. Well, there's a routine that I would do at that time in my life. When I would travel on a trip like this, I would come back to the Albuquerque airport. I'd stop at the ATM, pull out some cash, pull my animals out of the vet, get the car out of parking, fill up the car, and drive approximately 4 hours to our home in northern New Mexico. And on this one particular trip, I came home and I began that routine, and I didn't get very far with it. Because I went to the ATM at 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in Albuquerque airport, and the ATM machine told me there was nothing in that account. And I knew that it was a mistake. I knew that the account was full because I'd just been approved for a construction loan. It was a business construction loan on my property in northern New Mexico, and that there was plenty of money there, and I would check it Monday morning. So I drove home, and Monday morning, sure enough, I got up and I called the bank, and they said, well, there's no mistake, Mr. Braden. Not only is there no money in this account, you are overdrawn by 71 checks, and there's a $30 service charge in each of those checks. When can you come in and talk to us? I said, well, I'll be right there.
One of those checks was to me.
And one of those checks was to my dear friend, Jeff Volk, and that's how we met. So now Jeff gets the story. Because Jeff had trusted me and sent me a video. I'm sorry, Jeff. So I did. I went to the bank and I said, well, what's happening? They said, well, there was a wire withdrawal from your account. It was not authorized. It was not authorized by me, and they believed that it was. And every penny in that account had been taken, and all the checks had already been written outstanding were now coming back against that account. And when something like that happens, there's really no way to rationalize anything else. You can't do anything else. So I didn't even have enough money to put gas in my car and get my animals out of the vet. There was absolutely nothing that was there, and I had to go home and look at this. I said, wow, something big is happening here. Well, at the same time, I had just completed a tour, a series of workshops along the Pacific Northwest for about 30 days. And the people who had offered to set these programs up for me had many reasons why the money from those programs wouldn't come through. They said, well, our accounting isn't done, or we haven't reconciled our accounts, or whatever. Something was happening. And at the same time, the gentleman who was living on my property in exchange for the carpentry, and this is really very delicate for me, and I have to be really careful. I guess the best way to identify this is that he had chosen a lifestyle that not only was what our property was not about, it was illegal in the eyes of the state of New Mexico at that time. And I was asking him to change his lifestyle. Was that delicate? That was good. So all these things were happening at the same time. And I said, if the mirrors hold true, obviously there are some mirrors that are happening to me. What are these mirrors saying to me? Well, I went for a walk. I couldn't do much else. I had to go for a walk that day. There's a beautiful road that goes about 4 miles from our home down to the Rio Grande Gorge, a beautiful wildlife sanctuary. I went for a walk down the road that day. There's a huge mountain. It's called Ute Peak. There are a lot of stories from the Ute Indians about what this mountain, it's a very sacred mountain. It marks the end of their hunting grounds. And I often walk along this road in front of this mountain. I've written whole books, done entire workshops on this road, and I have to go home and put them in the computer. And I asked myself this question. I said, if these mirrors hold true, then there's a mirror that's happening here. What are these people showing to me? And I knew that I had to find a common thread. So I began looking at what each of these relationships was demonstrating. And I went through all kinds of possibilities. And when it was all said and done, what I knew that in each relationship, I knew that there were issues of honesty, integrity, and trust were the three that were really the most outstanding for me. And so I said to myself, if this mirror holds true, if people that are around me are demonstrating these patterns of behavior, are they showing me that I somehow am lacking in honesty, as Jeff may have thought, or integrity, or trust? Is that what they're showing me? And this feeling welled up inside of me before I even got that sentence out of my head and said, no, that's what this work is all about. That's precisely what this work is all about. And at the same time, there was a realization. It was such a powerful, it was subtle and powerful, that came to me, and I realized that they were not showing me a mirror of what I was in the moment, as we'd always been conditioned, as I'd been conditioned to believe. Rather, they were showing me a more subtle mirror, the mirror of what I judged in that moment. The mirror of what I judged in that moment. And that's precisely what was happening. I had a tremendous charge on honesty and integrity and trust. Such a charge that I was not willing to allow it in others. I was not willing to allow that in others. When you have a charge on something, what does that promise? It promises that you'll see it. You'll see it in your life if you've got a charge on it. I had that charge. These three people that came into my life, now I know that each of them was a powerful, skillful master that impeccably held the mirror to me during that time in my life of my greatest charges. And it was relatively concise the way they did that. It could have drawn out over years, and maybe it did. Maybe those mirrors have been shown to me year after year on such subtle levels that I never recognized them. And they became less subtle and less subtle and less subtle until something happened that I could not look away from. And in that moment, I had that mirror. In that moment, I was shown the second Essene mystery of relationship, the mirror of that which we judge in the moment. The gentleman that had invited me to work with him wanted to set up these seminars. The very first moment we met, something interesting happened. We met in the home of a mutual friend in Northern California. And the first moment we met, I'd never seen him before. I'd spoken with him on the phone. And our eyes met on the landing of this house. And I said something to him that I seldom, or rarely, will ask anyone upon first meeting him. And I simply said, "When's your birthday?" And he said, "Well, my birthday is June 28th, 1954. And I said, "Wow, that's my birthday. The exact month, the exact day, and the exact year." I'm a Cancerian. If you know much about Cancerians, you know that Cancerians live in a world of feeling. Maybe that's why we're exploring feelings this weekend. And I'm a double Cancerian, which means double feeling. And depending on how you run the charts, I've got 5 or 6 planets in the 12th house that are all in Cancer. So my world is a very feeling world. And my path has been to reconcile that feeling world with the academics and the hard sciences through the corporate and the academic world. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, you must have had the same experiences then." Another Cancerian male. What a great person to share this business with. And he said something to me in that moment. He looked me directly in the eyes, and he said something to me, and I discounted it. I used my logic, and what he said to me was, "Ha, I'm your evil twin." And he told me in that moment, and I discounted it. Because my logic said, "Oh, well, he's just making a joke." Although I had a feeling in here. The moment the gentleman moved onto my property to caretake for me in exchange for him living there, I had a feeling about him being there, and I discounted that feeling through my logic. I said, "Oh, Greg, you don't really even know that man." Well, that's precisely the point. You don't even know him. Why would you judge him? The moment that I began spending serious time with the potentially romantic relationship in my life, I had a feeling. And my logic said, "Oh, that's the feeling that you had from the last time you got hurt. So let's give this one a chance." And the reason I'm sharing this with you now is because in each of these there was a feeling that told me right up front. And there was more than one lesson that happened here, and I've shared this with other people, and it's been a powerful trigger for them. It's a lesson I didn't care for at the time. The week that I recognized the pattern of judgment, the week that I recognized that each of these people was masterfully mirroring for me the things that I judged in life, every other relationship that was held in place by judgment began to disappear. There's a cascading effect, and I share this with you now because I know that it works this way. If you are experiencing a pattern in one place in your life, it'll show up in other places in your life, and once it is healed, once it's reconciled in one place, it is healed everywhere simultaneously because we are holographic in nature. Our consciousness works that way. It is mirrored on many, many different levels. Well, the gentleman who had offered to do business with me, that relationship didn't work well at all, and I felt like I gave it ample opportunity, and the reality is it did work well, and I just didn't know what it was showing me. It worked perfectly as my mirror. So one day I called this gentleman and I said, I'm not going to work with you any longer. And I hung up the phone. There's more to it than that. I'm making a long story short. I hung up the phone, and as I did, I realized that every program and every source of income that I had for the next 6 months, I had just canceled. As my hand was on the phone, that was on a Saturday afternoon. So I had the rest of Saturday and all of Sunday to think about it. Sunday night, there was a message on my voice machine from a woman I had never met before, who through mutual friends had heard about these workshops, and she asked me to call her, and I did. And she said, I'm interested in sponsoring you and setting up programs for you around the country. Would you be interested in working with me? And the first thing I asked her, I said, well, when's your birthday? She said, June 28th, 1954. True story. And my first reaction was to hang up the phone, and I didn't do it. And I shared with her, I said, let me tell you a story. And I shared with her this story, and she said, well, would you be willing to give this a chance? This time, I paid attention to the way that I felt, and it felt different. Something was different. And I said, yes, I'd like to do this with you. If you know her, now she's a seminar coordinator and does workshops in her own right, and now an author of a couple of different books. Her name is Joanne Carl Cornog, if you've ever done any work with Joanne Cornog. And because I did not allow the first relationship to taint the second, because I was able to trust the feeling and really know what the feeling was saying, we've had a very powerful relationship, and it was through her that I met Melissa. So it's interesting how these things work out. Through that mirror, that second mirror of judgment, I was shown the things that I have the greatest charges on in my life. I was shown the mirror of that which I judge in the moment rather than that which I was in the moment. And I learned the powerful lesson of discernment, of trust. And it was a relatively inexpensive lesson compared to what came next, because immediately after that I began dealing with publishers and contracts and things like that. And through my powers of discernment, I averted what could have been some serious problems in that way. So I'll invite you, look in your life at the people that you hold most dear, because that's the magnet. That's the magnet. It may be love, it may be that they're family and you don't have any choice. The people that you hold most dear, and then look at the characteristics that they exhibit that just push your buttons right and left. And ask yourself this question, are they showing me in the moment? And if you honestly say the answer to that is no, then ask yourself the question, are they showing me that which I judge in the moment? And you may be surprised at what you find. The third scene mirror of relationship is perhaps one of the most commonly recognized mirrors. This is the mirror that we sense every time we find ourselves in the presence of another individual, and we look into their eyes, and in that moment this magic happens. This electrical charge tingles through our body. Perhaps the hair on the back of our neck and our arms stands up in the presence of this person whom we may not even know. What has just happened in that moment? Well, through the wisdom of this mirror, we're asked to allow for the possibility that through the course of our lives, in our innocence, to survive life's offering, that we give away huge portions of ourselves in the experience of life itself. That through the course of our lives, pieces of ourselves may be lost unknowingly, or perhaps given away knowingly, or taken from us by those who have power over us. When we find ourselves in the presence of another individual who embodies the very things that we have lost and that we are seeking to find that wholeness in ourselves, our bodies physiologically may respond to that. And we'll know that as a magnetic attraction to this individual. Should you find yourself in the presence of another, and for some unexplainable reason drawn to share time with this individual, ask yourself this question: what is it that I see in this person that I've lost, that I've given away, or that was taken from me? And you may be very surprised at what comes back to you, as the reality occurs that within nearly every individual who you will ever encounter, you will recognize this familiarity. You will sense this piece of yourself because we see it in one another throughout our lives. The third mystery of relationship. The fourth mystery, the fourth Essene mystery of relationship, is a mystery of a little bit different quality. Through the course of our lives, often we will adapt patterns of behavior that become so important to us that we will rearrange the rest of our lives to accommodate this pattern of behavior. When we find ourselves in this situation, often these patterns are identified as compulsive or addictive patterns of behavior. And the fourth mystery of relationship is the mystery that allows us to see ourselves in the presence of addiction or compulsion. Through addiction and compulsion, what happens is that we find ourselves giving away, little by little, the very things that we hold most dear in life. And in the giving away, little by little, we have the opportunity to recognize and see ourselves as we lose the things that we hold most dear. So for example, when we speak of addiction and compulsion, many people immediately bring to mind alcohol or chemicals or nicotine. And those certainly are patterns of behavior that may be addictive and compulsive. And there are others that are less obvious. Issues of control in a corporate or a family environment. The addictions to sex, always having to have sex, or always having to have money or create money, or abundance in our lives. Those are issues of compulsion and addiction as well. When an individual finds themselves in the presence of this pattern of behavior, what they may be assured of, and the beauty of this pattern, is that the pattern does not occur overnight. The pattern unfolds gradually over time, little by little by little. We give away the things that we hold most dear. If we are rearranging our lives to accommodate a pattern of alcohol or chemical abuse, we may be giving away the portions of our lives, our loved ones, our families, our jobs, our very livelihood to accommodate that. And this is the beauty of this pattern, that it may be recognized at any time, rather than taking it to its extreme and losing all. We may recognize this pattern at any time, heal that pattern, and find our wholeness in that healing. The fifth pattern of relationship, the fifth Essene mirror of relationship, for me perhaps is the single most powerful pattern. It, I believe, allows us to see more and to a greater level why we've lived the kinds of lives that we've lived perhaps than any other. It is the mirror that our parents show to us through the course of our lives and the time that we spend with them. Through this mirror, we're asked to allow for the possibility, to entertain the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, the actions of our parents toward us are mirroring our beliefs and our expectations of what may be the most sacred relationship we'll ever know in our lifetimes, and that is a relationship between us and our heavenly mother and father, or the male, masculine, female, feminine aspect of our Creator, however that's viewed. It is through this relationship, as we witness our parents, that our parents are showing us ourselves in that expectation and in those beliefs of that divine relationship. So for example, if we find ourselves in a relationship with parents where we feel we're judged constantly, or that we feel that our best is never good enough, there is a high probability that in that relationship, the truth of what's being mirrored is our belief within ourselves that we may not be good enough, or that we may not have accomplished that which has been expected of us through our perceptions of ourselves and our Creator. This is a powerful, it's a very subtle mirror, and it's a mirror that perhaps will tell us more about why we've lived our lives as we have than any other. The sixth scene mirror of relationship is a mirror that has a rather ominous name. The ancients call it the dark night of the soul. And clearly, the mirror does not have to be as ominous as its namesake. Through the dark night of the soul, we are reminded that life has a propensity toward balance. Nature has a propensity toward balance. And that it takes an extremely skillful, masterful being to upset the balance in nature and to upset the balance in our lives. When we find ourselves in the greatest challenges of life, it is in those moments that we may be assured the only way those challenges are possible is after we have amassed each tool that will allow us to move through that challenge with grace and with ease. That's the only way it can happen. Until those tools are amassed, we will never see ourselves in the situations that ask us to demonstrate these high levels of mastery. So from this perspective, the greatest challenges of life, those of relationship, perhaps our very survival, may be viewed as tremendous opportunities to demonstrate mastery rather than tests that may be passed or failed in life. And it's through this mirror of the dark night of the soul that we see ourselves naked, perhaps for the first time, without the emotion and the feeling and the thought of all of the constructs that we've created around us that we believe keep us safe in life. And it is through this dark night of the soul, perhaps for the first time, we have the opportunity to see ourselves in that way and to prove to ourselves, to demonstrate to ourselves that the process of life may be trusted and that we may trust ourselves in life. From the ancient perspectives, then, we're allowed, are asked to allow for the possibility that the forces at play in our polarized world are forces that have chosen to come to this world to anchor the polarized realities. That the light and the dark are in service to us so that we may know ourselves in all ways, and the only way to anchor the light in the dark in this world is for a force or a field or a consciousness to hold those mirrors for us. As we view pre-12th century texts, I believe that the scenario unfolds very clearly. As we're offered a story through the metaphors of individuals, the individual of Archangel Michael anchoring light, the metaphor of Archangel Lucifer anchoring dark. In pre-12th century texts, these metaphors are viewed as benevolent, loving beings that have chosen to descend into our world in service to us, holding benign mirrors of experience so that we may find ourselves anywhere between those mirrors, knowing ourselves in the presence of the lightest in the light and the darkest of the dark. I went back into the video room to see what this tape looked like. And they were reluctant to let me see it because there was a sense that I may judge myself on the screen as I live this mirror. If I am giving you the best I can do in this moment until I compare myself to someone else, this is perfect, and this is what this moment is. This is, for the Essenes, the most subtle, because we are so quick to judge ourselves, and we are our own most difficult judges. So what I'll say to you is I'll invite you to look at your life, look at the places in your life where you sense that you're not happy with yourself. The only way that can happen is if you've not done your best, or if you have done your best and you've compared it to someone else. What do you use as your yardstick? In our culture, what is our yardstick? We're compared to this man. You know what this man said when he was here? He said, you think the things I'm doing now are cool, wait till you see what you're about to do in 2,000 years. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. He said, don't hold me. Don't hold me on the pedestal. He said, you are far, far greater than I as you realize the power that lives within you. The power of thought, feeling, and emotion, and what you'll do with it. So that's the seventh Essene mirror of relationship, the mirror of perfection. Well, these 7 mirrors of relationship, powerful mirrors, powerful insights into why we have lived the kinds of lives and had the relationships that we have had. The Essenes remind us that we will all go through each of these mirrors at some point in our lives, whether we recognize them or not. Often we'll go through many mirrors simultaneously. That's the masters that we are. That's the masters that we become in this lifetime, is that we move through the mirrors and we move forward with life each day possibly without even recognizing why we're doing these things. Well, it would be nice to have a beautiful neon sign flash to us first thing in the morning and say, on this day, after you finished your breakfast and after you sent the family off on their day, you may begin your dark night of the soul. And the reality is that life does not happen to us in that way. We're invited to know ourselves in the presence of others through our relationships. And as those relationships are reconciled, we become the benefit of that healing. And it is that benefit that we carry with us through the waking dream of life as we walk between the worlds of heaven and earth. And this story is a story directly about Jesus of Nazareth and healing. And the story tells of a particular woman that he worked with one day and how he chose to respond to her requests. As we read these texts, it's interesting. What I've discovered is that not every single person that sought the help of Jesus was healed. He would ask them 2 questions. Depending on how they answered those questions, they may or may not have the benefit of the healing. The first one, he would ask, he'd say, do you believe in me? Do you believe in my Father? At that point in his life, he made no distinction between himself and his Father in heaven. Think about that. No distinction. In our language based in separation, as the translations were made, what's the most powerful prayer that we've been offered in the West, we believe? When you ask someone about a prayer, typically what prayer did they... Okay, and listen to how that was answered. We call it the Lord's Prayer. Whose Lord? The Essene traditions call it our Lord's Prayer. What is the first sentence of that prayer? Complete sentence. Who art in heaven. That's the Western translation. Our Father who art in heaven. There's the separation. Our Father's in heaven and we're down here somewhere. That's not the way the original Aramaic traditions read. They say our Father who is everywhere. Our Father who is everywhere. So our language plays such a potent role, and that's why I'll invite you to explore many paths as we're looking at the language. Well, it was through this language that I read of this story. He would ask him, do you believe in me? Do you believe in my Father? Because at that point in his life, he saw only the union of the two. And the person would say yes or no. Then he would ask him a question. He'd say, what have you learned in your illness? What have you learned in your illness? Typically, there were illnesses that people were asking to be healed of. And this particular story fascinates me because it was a woman that was born with leprosy. We don't see a lot of leprosy today, and there was a lot in this country where we don't see a lot. This woman had been born with leprosy, and she was angry at her disease. She said, "What do you mean, what have I learned? I've learned nothing. This is a mistake. I'm not supposed to have this." She says, "I am so hideous, I've never had a friend. I've never known a man. I'm so hideous, even the animals cower in my presence. Heal me of this affliction." And he said to her, "If you have learned nothing from your condition, then die and know yourself through death." Because he loved her that much. And that is the beginning of compassion. He had no attachment to the outcome. He could have felt a lot of peer pressure. He could have been there on the shores of Galilee and said, "Okay, there's 10,000 people behind me. There's a woman in front of me. They're asking me to do something. I got to do something quick." I mean, he could have had a thought process like that, and he didn't. He loved her. She had, from this perspective, through her mastery, allowed or created that condition in her life so that she may know herself in that way. If it had not served her, why would he take that away from her? Thought without attachment to the outcome. A few years ago, we had the opportunity on the 6 o'clock news, many of our homes, to witness a tragedy that has happened far too many times. Once is too many. This particular tragedy was in a small country of Rwanda, where approximately 10,000, we still don't even know the exact number, 10,000 civilians were depicted on the news, massacred by their own people on the rural roadsides in that country. And I was with a group of friends that evening, and we watched this, and it was just the right group of friends for that evening, because I had the opportunity to look around. There were 4 of us. And I had the opportunity to look at the other 3 and see what had happened with them. So as the reports went on, there was a woman that was in the living room, and I asked her, I said, "How do you feel about this?" She was enraged. She said, "This is ridiculous." She was pounding her fist on the coffee table. A lot of fist pounding in these stories. She said, "When are we going to stop this? When are we going to send the Marines to kill the soldiers that killed the civilians so there isn't any more of this going on? Why don't we stop this?" There was another gentleman who was in the living room. And he had just kind of gotten into the New Age thoughts. And I asked him what he felt about it. And he said, "About what? The Rwandans?" He said, "They knew that was going to happen." He said, "That was their karma. They knew on some level when they came in this lifetime they were going to die that way." And he said, "There really is no death anyway. It's about 6 o'clock. You want to get a bite to eat?" And he felt nothing. And there was a third woman who'd gotten up and walked into the kitchen. And I followed her in and I said, "What did this program mean to you, what you saw tonight?" And she turned around, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "I don't know." She said, "I don't want the soldiers to die, because that's the same kind of thinking that led to the deaths in the first place." She said, "I don't think we should go in and send in the Marines, and I just don't want any more people to die." She said, "I miss those people, even though I never knew them. I feel different in my world because I know now that they're no longer here." That's the beginning of compassion. The first woman was in polarity. She was angry. She was in the same polarity that allowed that tragedy in the first place. The second gentleman was in denial. What he had seen hurt him on such a deep level, he did not allow himself to feel it, so he rationalized it away. And the third woman allowed herself to feel, and in doing so opened the path to the possibility of compassion. How do you know if you're in denial or lovingly detached? You can ask yourself the simple question. If you feel nothing when you witness an outrage or a tragedy such as this, there's a good possibility that it has hurt you on such a deep level that you are in denial. If you feel for what has occurred and you're not seeking retribution, trying to get even, or the mentality that somebody's got to pay, then you're not in the polarity. You're allowing yourself to feel what has happened. And if you can say to yourself, "I miss those people, and this didn't have to happen," and there's a sense that somehow there's a balance that's occurred here, you may be at the path at the doorway to what we call compassion in our lives. This is a completion for our animal story that I began yesterday. My little friend Merlin, somebody said, well, what, are you going to tell us whatever happened to Merlin? Where is Merlin? And I'll share that with you now because it's been a really powerful part of my life, and it is very relevant to make concrete these sometimes nebulous concepts that we're describing here. Well, I got all the things I needed to take Merlin across country, and Merlin and I had a great adventure from Mount Shasta all the way to northern New Mexico. And we live about 6 miles from the Colorado border, so we're in a very high mountainous area. And Merlin grew to be a very healthy, vigorous, beautiful, large black male cat. Not a speck of any other color on him. He was completely black. And a very good friend. Merlin, if you've ever read the book Awakening the Zero Point, he was right there on the table with me as I wrote each evening. And every once in a while he'd get up and stretch and he'd walk across the keyboard. And sometimes he'd type words that made sense, and I'd have to read those. So if you saw a lot of typos in that book, I'd like to say Merlin helped me with those. And Merlin used to go out every single day. We'd let him out first thing in the morning, and his rule was he had to come back in by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he did that for several years. There was one day Merlin went outside and he didn't come back. And at first I wasn't too concerned about that. I thought, well, maybe it's just a kiddie walkabout. You know, it's a male thing. He was going to explore this territory in northern New Mexico. And by the time the second day rolled around, I was a little concerned, and I really felt something was happening. And by the third day, I knew something had gone wrong from my perspective at that time. And I stopped everything I was doing. I returned no phone calls, no correspondence. I did no business. And for 5 solid days, I invited friends in our valley, and we looked for Mr. Merlin everywhere. We looked in coyote dens, we looked in owl nests, we looked in badgers' burrows where we could find them. We went and looked around eagles' nests down in the valley. There's 136,000 acres of sage that borders our property, owned by a Bureau of Land Management. It's fenced off, and we'd walk from one end to the other and tie off a piece of ribbon, take 3 steps over and walk back so we could scour every foot of the fields. And after a few days, I really had this feeling inside that something was terribly wrong. And I felt like he was alive and maybe he'd fallen into a well and needed some help, or he was in an old abandoned building, or he was in a hunter's trap, or something had happened. And one morning as I was laying in bed, the sun had not come up yet, and it was light. It was about to come up. And I asked for a sign, and I simply said, Father, I asked for the sign. Is my friend Merlin alive? Does he need me, or what's happened? And I didn't even get the sentence out of my mind. I hadn't even finished that sentence yet, and something happened that had never happened before. It's never happened since. From 360 degrees all around our property, I heard more coyotes yip and yell and scream and cry, broad daylight. And then as soon as they, just as suddenly as they began, they stopped. And I knew in that moment that Merlin was no longer with me, and that he'd been taken by a coyote. Well, I got up that morning, drove a truck down the road, and something very odd began to happen. There were coyotes everywhere in broad daylight. There were young ones and old ones, and they were walking in 2s and 3s. They walked in the road right in front of my truck. They were all over my property. And normally you'd only see them maybe very early in the morning or at dusk. You typically did not see them in broad daylight. And I had an opportunity in that moment. And if it had happened at another point in my life, I may have been very angry at every coyote. I may have chosen to stand on top of one of my buildings and snipe each one and said, maybe you're the one that took my friend Merlin. And I didn't feel that way. I didn't want the coyotes to lose their lives. I missed my friend Merlin and his presence. I missed his life. And in that choice of not being angry at those coyotes while still allowing for the emotion of losing my friend, for me, that was a powerful opportunity and an opening into compassion. thought without attachment to the outcome, feeling without distortion, emotion without charge. It hurt me deeply. He was a very, very close friend. And I share animal stories, and maybe to some people they're kind of silly, and if you have ever been alone in your life, or I've never had any children, animals have essentially been children, and they've been powerful teachers to me, really powerful teachers. In the traditions of the ancient and the indigenous peoples, each time the breath of a human passes through an instrument of the earth, in that moment is reenacted the most sacred act of all, the holy marriage between spirit and matter. The value of a body of information such as walking between the worlds, and one of the factors that allowed me to pull this information together is because it is a very concise examination of these traditions, these ancient traditions that were left to us, and the recognition of the unity of all life. My belief is that we are beings of spirit, and we are incapable of anything other than a spiritual path. So regardless of our choice in lives, we are walking the spiritual path. And as we recognize the unity of life around us, we live that spirit.
There are a series of petroglyphs. It was discovered that they were actually solstice markings. And the way they work is as the solstice shines through, the sun shines through on the day of the solstice through a particular fissure in the rocks, it's carved to create the image of a fish. And there's a straight line that moves through the mouth of the fish along the rock. And as the solstice progresses, the fish moves along this straight line. There's always been another line that deviated from that. No one ever really knew what that meant. Last year, for some unexplained reason, as the fish was moving along the line of the solstice, it dipped onto the line that hasn't been used before, indicating that something has changed in orientation. We're here in the high mountains of northern New Mexico, and we're speaking of the Essene traditions. And for so many people, have said to me, well, the Essenes were from the Dead Sea. Why would you reference them here in this part of the world? As the new evidence comes to light, some very shocking evidence to some researchers, we are finding a pretty good body of information to support the possibility that the Essenes were here in North America 2,500 years ago, through the Yucatan, through South America, into Peru and Bolivia, as well as in the Middle East. And each place that they traveled, they left the seeds of their wisdom. The seeds of their wisdom are based in today what we call the science of compassion. We have an opportunity this weekend to awaken within us what I believe is a memory of the single most sophisticated technology ever to grace this world. It's a technology that lives within each of us. Almost universally, the ancient traditions, ancient texts, point to this time in history as being unique both in terms of earth and human experience. They were so clear, the ancients, those who have come before us,
that they left for us volumes of information, entire texts, and the only words that they knew of their time, the only way they knew to communicate what this time in our world would mean to us. And they said to us, they said that during these days there would be a generation that would be birthed that would have a power inherent within their being. And by virtue of their life experience, relationships in the presence of one another, that power would be awakened. And in the awakening, that they would never be the same again. Their world and their bodies would never be the same again. They were so clear as to the timing and the role that the people in this time in history would play, that they actually had a name for those who would live in this time. I believe that this is the generation that has chosen to bridge all that has ever been with that which is yet to be. We've chosen to bridge the old paradigms of light and dark with the new paradigm that has no name as yet. What we're about to do this weekend transcends science. It transcends religion. It transcends ancient mysticism. It's a new wisdom that has no name as yet. And as we remember the union of those ancient traditions, the way they were offered to us, I believe it is through that path that we awaken this moment within us. The ancients believed that humans would have the opportunity to walk one of two paths. The first path was the path of external technology. And that's the path that we know very well. It's where we build machines, we build devices outside of our bodies. Possibly without knowing that every time we do so, what we're doing is building a mirror of some function within our bodies. Now, the first time I said that to a group of people, they said, well, what do you mean? We're not toasters and we're not VCRs. And I said, no, we're not toasters and VCRs. And the very components that allow a toaster and a VCR to be what they are, we embody in each cell of our bodies. Every cell of our body exhibits about 1.17 volts of electrical potential. And we have many, many cells in our bodies. How do we activate that potential? Well, the ancients said that we activate and regulate it through emotion. They were so clear that this generation would be the generation to remember that technology, that inner technology. They wrote entire volumes to you and even had a name for you. They called you, you who walk between the worlds. You are the ones that walk between the worlds. Well, this technology that we're asked to embody, I believe we've reached a crossroads in human conscious evolution. We have built the machines outside of our bodies to remember who we are in here. We have built the machines that demonstrate capacitance and resistance. They transmit information and they receive information. You know, every cell in your body does that. From the perspective of the ancients, we begin the second path the moment that we become that technology. We're building machines to clean up the air and to heal our earth out here. We are those machines. We're reminded that Earth will go through tremendous, unprecedented change at this time in history, and that our bodies will mirror that change. How many of you feel like you're going through tremendous change in your lives right now? I know I do. Each day. Very few things surprise me, although I'm constantly in awe as the process unfolds. How many feel like time is speeding up? Do you still feel? Have you noticed that your body functions are speeding up? We have changed. Researchers call it spontaneous genetic mutation. Something began happening about 5 years ago, and DNA now, in some individuals, doesn't look the way it used to. And in those individuals, they have developed a tremendously enhanced immunity to what used to be potentially life-threatening diseases, HIV, cancers. Cells in their bodies replicate over 100 times faster than they've ever been documented before. As they age through linear time, their bodies don't deteriorate. Why? What is it they've done differently? And researchers said, what supplements have you taken? Are you taking vitamins or a mushroom drink from the Ukraine that you ferment in your refrigerator? And they said, no, we changed our belief systems. Belief, thought, feeling, and emotion. You'll see very, very clearly the ancients left us those components as a technology that I believe is accessible. And it's an accessible state of awareness that today we call compassion. So when we look at the challenges of life, and we look at the things that have hurt us in the past, we look at the 6 o'clock news, we watch what's unfolding in third world countries and in our own backyard, is it possible that the things that have hurt us so deeply in the past, could they be the triggers that we've consented to? Could our greatest challenges of relationship and health and our very survival, could those challenges be the way that we redefine biologically who we are in our lives? As we learn, as we remember new ways to respond to those, are we redefining the biological parameters in our lives? Are we becoming a new species? And I believe the answer to that is yes. And I'll say this right off. Those of you that know me already know this. And if you do not, I'll share this with you. I'm an optimist. I believe unfailingly that every process that's unfolding within our earth, within the social, political, economic, military, meteorological, geological systems that we call our world, all that change, I believe that change is healthy and natural. And I believe that we're living a cycle. We've lived cycles before. We may not recognize a cycle because they're so long in duration. And I believe that it is through the challenges of our lives that we have the opportunity to redefine who we are in this world and to become something greater than what life offers to us and to move forward very quickly. So from this perspective, could our greatest challenges of health, survival, and relationship be the mechanism through which we redefine biological parameters that we accepted long ago in our ancient memories? I believe this is the challenge and this is the opportunity that we're being given today. We remembered the role that our bodies play in the unfolding of our lives and our earth. Well, today, through many ancient temples around the world and right in our own backyard, Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, I believe this is one of the most massive temple complexes. A legacy to that memory is left to us. In this particular complex, the temple was built around a series of circular structures called kivas. And it was through these kivas, the ancients said that they were able to know themselves in all ways and to speak to other worlds. When we look at these traditions from the perspective, from the lens of our modern Western technological society, often in the past, we've had a tendency to view these as primitive societies. Is it possible that these societies were so highly developed with the internal technology that they had little need for complex external technology? Perhaps. Well, as we witness sites such as Chaco Canyon and other sites in South America through the Yucatan, almost universally, the ancient calendars, the ancient texts, systems of timekeeping, and the oral traditions all point to this time in history as being very unique. They say that something will happen in our earth, and that something will be mirrored in our bodies. And as we come to terms with what that something is all about, that we will never be the same again, and that shift is us remembering the greatest potential of what it means to be human. So as we witness through these ancient traditions, their legacy, the mirrors that they left to us of how they have known themselves in all ways, I believe that we have a tremendous opportunity to redefine what our lives mean to us, what every relationship in our lives mean to us, what each phenomenon unfolding within our earth means to us. Because from this perspective, each of those will become a challenge. And in that challenge lives an opportunity to redefine how we respond to our world. As we witness our ancient traditions, those who have come before us, we have the opportunity to view the continuity between their lives thousands of years ago and our lives today. And even beyond those ancient traditions, as we witness the events happening beyond our world. In our path of external technology, where we have built the machines, we've built the devices outside of our bodies, we've traveled deep into the world of the quantum atom. We've witnessed in a human womb the moment of conception. We have built machines, surrogates of our perceptions, extensions of our senses, to carry us into these worlds that we believe we have been separate from. Because all of the information and all of the data and all of the numbers point to a force that may not be created, may not be destroyed. We're hard-pressed to measure it. All the information points back to us. And it says that there's a force that lives within us. A force the ancients called spirit. And it is that force that we're asked to come to terms with at this time in human as well as earth history. The very parameters that we're living now were simulated thousands of years ago. The ancients immersed themselves into those chambers, recorded what those experiences meant to their bodies, to their feelings, to their emotions, to their perceptions of time-space relationships. And they passed them down to us in the only way they knew how, through the words of their time. For me, that provides a beautiful continuity in terms of our experience, because they knew about this time in history. This is actually a reconstruction of what one of these kivas looked like. This is a little bit farther north in Farmington, New Mexico. It almost has an Egyptian feel to it when I see this. Isn't that beautiful? And it's within these chambers. Today, if you ask an indigenous American what they use these for, they say, well, we use them to speak to other worlds and to talk to our ancestors. And up until recently, we said, sure, that was the primitive perspective. And now we know that in these chambers, they're actually simulating low magnetics, high frequency, inducing altered states, allowing the individuals to have that experience. They were telling us precisely what they were used for. And the kiva is only one example. But what I find particularly fascinating is that almost universally, ancient calendars, this is the temple wall in Dendara, the zodiac calendar in Egypt, ancient calendars, methods of timekeeping that were both oral and written end in these days. Isn't it interesting? This calendar began around 39,000 years ago. The Mayan calendar, by some estimates, over 18,000 years old. They had the technology to plot time from then until now, and the calendars all converge on this time in history, on this generation, during our lifetime, and there are no new calendars. Why is that? What the Mayans say, the Mayan calendars, they're very clear. They say that time as we know it actually ended in July of 1992. And they say from July of 1992 to December of the year 2012, that this generation is living a time that they called no time. And during no time, there would be a realignment of the systems of time. And they said, by the way, don't bother to build a new calendar because you'll never perceive time the same again. It will make no sense to you to build the calendars. The Mayan culture is especially fascinating to me because they sort of disappeared 500 years ago. And what they said was that we were entering, Earth was entering into 500 years of darkness, of a dark cycle. So they said, we're not going to stay around for 500 years of darkness. They left a few people behind, a skeleton crew, if you will. And from their perspective, we are just now emerging from that cycle of darkness. We're waking up into that light once again. So the Egyptian calendar, in case you couldn't see what that looked like, this is a schematic of our zodiac. And in addition to the calendars, many of the ancient traditions. This is a portion of a relatively long story of human experience from a temple in the American desert Southwest. Isn't it interesting? Anywhere else in the world you go and you see structures like we see in the American desert Southwest, they call them temples. What do we call them in our country? What do we call those things? Old ruins. We call them old ruins. They're temples, just like they are in any other part of the world. And this is from a temple wall in the American desert Southwest, indicating this time in history from their perspective. This is the spiral of life. And they said that during this time, we would find a new life within ourselves, and that all life would be abundant, that food would be abundant, that humans would live in abundance. It's interesting to see from the different perspectives, and certainly this may not be scientific, and it's interesting to see how the different traditions converge at this time. From the Hopi perspective, 1979, Hopi elders convened in northern Arizona, and they shared for the first time publicly the prophecies that had been held sacred to them for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And they said, we believe that now is the time that our prophecies speak of, and this is the time to share these traditions with all humans, not just Hopi. And what they said was that there would be a series of signs. One of the first, they said, would be the crescent moon would appear on Earth as well as in the heavens. And everyone said, well, what does that mean? How does the moon appear on Earth as well as the heavens? Well, just a couple of years later, in 1993, we began to see the crescent moon crop circles for the first time. And what you're seeing here is a series of crescent moons offset by 90 degrees. When the Hopi elders began seeing this, tears came to their eyes, and they believed it was the fulfillment of that first prophecy. A second part of that prophecy says that there will be a new star birthed in the heavens, and it will be a blue star. It will have a very different quality of light than the quality of our sun that we see today. And for many people, they believed maybe that would be a time of planetary alignments, when many planets or stars would line up, and it would appear to us to be a blue star, until 1994. 1994, when 21 fragments of something, we're still studying what it was that even impacted Jupiter in 1994, whether it was a comet or an asteroid or whatever it was. 21 fragments of something impacted potentially flammable layers of atmosphere on Jupiter that have never been ignited. And researchers, if you were following the internet at that time, researchers were fascinated by this, and one of the possibilities that they were suggesting was that those layers may ignite from the heat of these fragments impacting the atmosphere. Well, what resulted surprised everyone, because it was not an all-out explosion, and it wasn't that nothing happened. It was something in between. The flammable layers were sandwiched in between non-flammable layers. And I believe we're still witnessing, it's not over yet, I think we're still witnessing the potential of what those impacts may mean, because there appears to be a smoldering effect. And Jupiter is, if you're looking at within the right wavelengths of ultraviolet spectra, Jupiter is giving off a new light that she has not given off in the past. So from the Hopi perspective, that's the way that they're seeing this happen. They believe that we're living a time of purification. And they say that through the relationships in our lives, we'll come to terms with what our lives mean to us. And these were all signs to them of what this time might mean. Well, all of these phenomena, interesting as they are, many researchers view them as discrete, non-related phenomena. And the reason that I'm so fascinated by them is because they're all happening at this time in history. They're all happening now. Why? Why didn't these things happen 50 years ago? I believe to really understand what this time means to us, as interesting as it is to see all of the other phenomenon right here on Earth, is where we find the best information and possibly the greatest insight into what this may mean to us. This is a cross-section, a little cutaway of Earth, showing the different layers of the Earth and the magnetic lines of force shown schematically. And what we see from this schematic is that 2,000 years ago, the magnetic fields of the Earth, indicated by the red line, reached a peak. And they began to decline very quickly, and they've continued to decline. And currently, we're at the lowest point of Earth magnetics that we've had for the last 2,000 years. There is an organization in the Pacific Northwest, GeoMonitor, who is measuring this, and they were recently asked about how much this decline has really occurred. And what they said amazed many people, because they said this decline, if you look at on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest magnetics that we've had in the last 2,000 years, on a scale of 1 to 10, right now, Earth magnetics are between a 1 and a 1.5. And those magnetics have a very profound impact on human emotion and human physiology. Earth has a pulse. The ancients knew this. They call it the heartbeat of our planet. And our technological society really didn't know what to make of that until just a few years ago. What we now know is that every 1 second of our life experience, Earth pulses a certain number of times. Historically, that number has been right around 7.8 cycles, or 7.8 hertz, or 7.8 beats per second. It was first discovered, measured directly in 1898, actually not far from here in Colorado Springs. Well, that pulse, we believed, was a constant, because it remained the same all the way up until the mid-1980s. In the mid-1980s, it began to shift, and this is where the controversy comes in. Different researchers using different equipment are measuring different kinds of shifts. They agree that there's a change. They are not in agreement as to what that change means. So if for no other reason, based on our technology today, we are seeing at least 2 parameters that are shifting very quickly. The magnetics are falling, frequencies are increasing. And what I believe that we're seeing is a time in history when we will move to the convergence point of those two. As the magnetics fall and those frequencies increase, that they find a point where they come very, very close, possibly meet. And the day that that happens is the day that the ancient traditions and the ancient texts have referenced for so long. It's the day we begin what they called the shift of the ages, or what so many people today call the New Age, the dawning of a New Age, or the Hopi called the beginning of the Sixth World. Or some researchers are calling a dimensional shift or dimensional translation or a magnetic reversal. There are many different ways of looking at this time in history.